Sunrise Gulch, Dakota Territory, 1896. Fanny Garrison wiped rain from her face and stared at the quilt square in her trembling hands. The stitched note, hidden in the hem, clear as day now, that she had pulled the thread loose. The land office clerk, Eustace Ramsey, was selling forged claims, and the train carrying the surveyor's records would be hit tonight, before the spring thaw exposed everything. She stood in the doorway of her small cabin on the edge of town, 28 years old, blonde hair pulled back in a work braid, blue eyes sharp with exhaustion and something harder, watching the storm roll in from the coast. She had been saving every coin for a ticket east, away from this brutal place that had buried her brother 2 winters back. But now she held proof of a plot that would destroy the only town left between her and starvation. The note said the heist would happen at mile marker 14, where the tracks curved through the narrow pass, and the gang would burn the records to hide the fraud. Fanny knew one man in town who could ride through this storm and reach the train in time. Joseph Daniels, the former Confederate officer who kept to himself in a shack near the livery. The only man fool enough, or skilled enough, to risk the mudslides and flash floods that came with these late fall downpours. She pulled her shawl tight and ran through the rain toward the livery, boots sinking in mud with every step. The wind tried to shove her back, but she pushed forward, clutching the quilt square against her chest. Joseph Daniels was shoeing a horse when she burst through the livery door, soaked and gasping. He looked up, 32 years old, dark brown hair cut short, gray eyes that had seen too much, broad shoulders under a worn work shirt, and his hands stilled on the hoof.
What happened?
His voice was low and steady, the kind that did not waste words. Fanny held out the quilt square, her Swedish accent thickening with urgency.
There is a train heist tonight, mile marker 14. They will burn the surveyor records, and this whole town loses everything. You have to ride out and stop them.
Joseph set down the hoof and took the square, reading the stitched note with a frown that deepened into something cold.
Ramsey.
Yes, he has been selling false claims. My brother bought one before he died. I found this square in a batch of donated quilts at the church. Someone tried to warn us.
Joseph looked at her, rain dripping from her hair onto the straw floor, her eyes fierce despite the fear.
If I ride out in this, I might not come back. The pass floods every storm.
If you do not ride out, the train gets hit and Ramsey destroys the proof. Everyone here loses their land. I lose mine. You lose yours.
He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once.
I will go, but you stay here where it is safe.
No. I am coming with you. I know the pass better than anyone. My brother and I used to hunt up there.
Joseph shook his head.
Too dangerous.
You need someone who knows the shortcuts. The train will not wait.
He saw the set of her jaw and knew arguing would waste time they did not have.
Fine, but you follow my lead, and if I say run, you run.
Fanny nodded, and they saddled 2 horses fast, Joseph checking the rifles and ammunition while Fanny tied down the saddlebags. The storm hammered the roof, and the horses stamped nervously, but Joseph calmed them with a hand on each neck, his voice quiet and firm. They mounted and rode out into the downpour, the wind shoving them sideways as they pushed toward the edge of town. The road turned to mud within minutes, and the horses struggled for footing, but Joseph kept them moving, his experience showing in every adjustment of weight and rain. Fanny rode beside him, her face stinging from the cold rain, her hands numb on the reins. They passed the last cabin and entered the open country where the wind hit harder, flattening the grass and bending the scrub trees. Joseph shouted over the storm,
How far to the pass?
3 miles. Maybe 4 in this mud.
He nodded and urged his horse faster, Fanny matching his pace. The trail climbed, and the horses labored, their breath steaming in the cold air. Lightning cracked overhead, and thunder followed close, the storm directly above them now. Fanny pointed to a narrow gap between 2 rocky outcrops.
That way, it cuts a half-mile off the main road.
Joseph turned his horse, and they squeezed through the gap, branches scraping their legs, rocks slick under the hooves. On the other side, the ground dropped sharply, and they had to dismount and lead the horses down a slope that was turning into a stream. Fanny slipped, and Joseph caught her arm, steadying her without a word. They remounted at the bottom and pushed on, the sound of rushing water growing louder. The pass opened ahead, a narrow cut through the hills where the train tracks ran, and Joseph reined in hard.
Look.
Fanny followed his gaze and saw 4 men on horseback near the tracks, one holding a lantern, another checking a pocket watch. Eustace Ramsay stood with them, his thin frame unmistakable even in the rain, his voice carrying on the wind, though the words were lost. Joseph dismounted and pulled his rifle, motioning for Fanny to do the same.
What is the plan?
We get close enough to scare them off before the train arrives. If we can stop the heist, the records stay intact.
And if they do not scare?
Then, we fight.
Fanny checked her rifle and followed Joseph as he moved through the rocks, using the storm for cover. They closed to within 50 yards before one of the men spotted them and shouted. Ramsay turned, his face pale in the lantern light, his eyes narrowing. The men drew their guns, and Joseph fired first, the shot echoing through the pass. One of the gang members went down, and the others scattered, returning fire. Fanny dropped behind a rock and aimed carefully, squeezing the trigger and watching another man stumble. Joseph moved forward, firing and reloading with practiced speed, his movements efficient and calm. Ramsay ran for his horse, but Joseph cut him off, stepping into his path with the rifle leveled.
Do not move.
Ramsay froze, his hands rising slowly, his face twisted with rage. The other 2 gang members were pinned down by Fanny's fire, and Joseph called out to them.
Drop your guns, or I shoot Ramsay.
One of them threw down his weapon and raised his hands. The other hesitated until Fanny fired near his feet, and he followed suit. Joseph kept his rifle on Ramsay, his voice cold.
You have been selling forged claims.
Ramsay sneered. The land office clerk told Joseph the surveyor records were the only proof, and once the train burned, nobody could challenge the sales. Joseph glanced at Fanny.
Tie them up.
Fanny moved quickly, using rope from her saddlebag to bind the 2 gang members, while Joseph covered Ramsay. The sound of a train whistle cut through the storm, and Joseph looked up sharply.
It is early.
We have to stop it before it hits the pass, if they planted charges.
Joseph grabbed Ramsay by the collar and shoved him toward the tracks.
Where are the charges?
Ramsay stayed silent, and Joseph shook him hard.
Tell me, or I leave you tied to the rails.
Ramsay paled and pointed to a spot 30 yards up the line where a bundle of dynamite was wedged under the tracks, the fuse already lit and burning fast. Joseph shoved Ramsay at Fanny and sprinted for the dynamite, his boots slipping on the wet rocks. The train rounded the bend, its headlight cutting through the rain, the whistle blowing again. Joseph reached the dynamite and yanked it free, the fuse sparking and hissing. He ran for the edge of the embankment and hurled it as hard as he could, diving flat as it exploded midair with a blast that shook the ground. The train engineer saw the flash and slammed the brakes, the wheels screeching as the engine slowed. Joseph rolled to his feet and waved his arms, shouting for them to stop. The train came to a halt 20 yards from where the dynamite had been planted, steam hissing from the brakes. The engineer leaned out, his face pale. The engineer demanded to know what was happening, and Joseph explained quickly, pointing to Ramsey and the others. Fanny brought Ramsey forward, and Joseph made him repeat the confession, while the engineer and 2 brakemen listened, their expressions hardening. The engineer said they would take Ramsey and the gang to the territorial marshal in the next town, and Joseph nodded.
The surveyor records are safe.
The engineer confirmed the records were locked in the mail car and untouched. Fanny exhaled hard, her shoulders sagging with relief. The train crew took custody of Ramsey and the gang members, loading them into the mail car under guard. Ramsey glared at Fanny as they dragged him past. The land office clerk hissed that the spring thaw would flood the valley and destroy the town anyway, and Fanny would lose everything she had saved for. Fanny met his eyes without flinching.
At least, it will be mine to lose.
The train pulled away slowly, the wheels grinding as it picked up speed, and Joseph stood beside Fanny, watching it disappear into the rain. The storm was easing, the wind dropping to a steady blow, the rain thinning. Joseph turned to her.
You could have been killed.
So could you.
I have done this before.
So have I. My brother and I fought off claim jumpers twice before he died.
Joseph looked at her differently then, seeing the scars she carried.
Why did you stay here if you wanted to go east?
I kept thinking if I left I would be abandoning him, like his death meant nothing. But staying has been just as hard.
What changed?
Finding that note, realizing the town would fall apart if someone did not act. I could not let that happen to others, even if I still want to leave.
Joseph nodded slowly.
I came here to start over, left everything behind after the war. Thought distance would make it easier, but it just made it lonelier.
Is that why you stay alone?
Easier than risking more loss.
Fanny understood that too well. They walked back to the horses, the mud sucking at their boots, and mounted in silence. The ride back to town was slower, the horses tired, and the riders exhausted. The storm broke fully as they reached the edge of Sunrise Gulch, the clouds splitting to show stars and a sliver of moon. They stopped at the livery, and Joseph helped Fanny dismount, his hand lingering on her arm.
You saved the town.
We both did.
You brought the proof. I just rode.
You risked your life.
Joseph shrugged.
So did you.
They stood close, the space between them charged with something neither had expected. Fanny broke the silence.
What happens now?
The marshal will handle Ramsey. The claims will be investigated. People will get their land back if they can prove purchase.
And you?
I stay. I have nowhere else to go.
Neither do I. Not really. I have been saving for a ticket I am not sure I want anymore.
Joseph looked at her, his gray eyes steady.
Why not?
Because leaving means giving up, and tonight reminded me I am not ready to do that.
He smiled, a rare thing that softened his face.
Good.
Over the next 2 weeks, the territorial marshal came through and arrested 3 more men tied to Ramsey's smuggling operation, a ring that had been running stolen goods through the pass for 2 years. The land office reopened under new management, and families began filing claims to recover their property. Fanny worked with the new clerk to verify her brother's purchase and secured clear title to her homestead. Joseph helped repair storm damage around town, his skills with carpentry and his steady presence earning him respect. People started asking his advice, inviting him to meals, pulling him into the community he had avoided. Fanny saw him more often, their paths crossing at the general store, the livery, the church. They spoke briefly each time, the conversations growing longer, more personal. One Sunday after service, Fanny found Joseph waiting outside, his hat in his hands.
"Walk with me."
She agreed, and they walked toward the edge of town, where the land opened into rolling hills still green from the late fall rains. Joseph stopped near a stand of cottonwoods and turned to her.
"I have been thinking about what you said, about not giving up.
And
I want to stop running. I want to build something here, but I do not want to do it alone."
Fanny felt her heart kick hard against her ribs.
what are you asking?
I am asking if you would consider staying, not just in town, but with me, building a life together.
She stared at him, the blunt honesty of it taking her breath.
Joseph, we barely know each other.
I know you are brave. I know you do not quit. I know you saved this town as much as I did. And I know I have not felt this clear about anything since before the war.
Fanny looked away, her thoughts tangled.
I have been alone so long, I am not sure I remember how to be anything else.
Neither do I, but I would rather try with you than stay safe and empty.
She met his eyes and saw the same hunger for hope she carried, the same bruised determination.
I am scared.
So am I.
She took a breath and nodded.
Then, let us be scared together.
Joseph smiled and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. They walked back toward town as the sun broke through the clouds, the light turning the wet grass gold. The next Sunday they stood in the church doorway after service and signed the deed to a combined property. Joseph's shack and Fanny's homestead merged into a single claim. The preacher witnessed, and the town gathered, clapping and calling congratulations. Fanny wore a simple blue dress, and Joseph wore a clean shirt, his hair combed back, and when he looked at her, she saw the promise neither had expected, but both were ready to keep. They walked out into the sunlight together, the storm long past, the future uncertain, but no longer empty. The town cheered, and someone started playing a fiddle, the music bright and fast. Joseph pulled Fanny close and kissed her, his hand cradling her face, and she kissed him back with everything she had held in reserve for so long. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers.
No more running.
No more running.
They spent the rest of the day at a celebration in the town square. Tables set up with food and drink, children running between the adults. The whole community turning out to mark the occasion. Fanny and Joseph danced together as the sun set, her hand in his, their steps simple but sure. The fiddle played, and the stars came out, bright and cold in the clear sky. Later they walked to the homestead, their homestead now, and stood in the doorway looking out over the land they would work together. Joseph put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, the warmth of him a comfort she had not known she needed.
Do you think the spring thaw will flood the valley like Ramsay said?
Maybe. But we will be ready. We will build higher, dig channels, do what it takes.
Together.
Together.
Fanny smiled and turned to kiss him again. Slower this time, the promise settling into something real and lasting. They went inside and closed the door, the lamplight warm against the windows, the night quiet except for the wind across the prairie. In the weeks that followed, they worked side by side, repairing fences, planting late crops, preparing for winter. Joseph taught Fanny to shoot better, and she taught him to cook the Swedish dishes her mother had made. They talked late into the nights, sharing stories they had kept buried, learning each other in the steady way of people who had both been hurt and were choosing trust anyway. The town rebuilt and the smuggling ring was dismantled. The pass reopened for honest trade. Fanny kept the quilt square that had started everything, framing it and hanging it over the fireplace as a reminder of the night that changed both their lives. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Joseph pulled out a small carved box and handed it to Fanny.
I made this for you.
She opened it and found a silver ring, simple and unadorned, and her throat tightened.
Joseph.
I know we signed the deed, but I wanted to do this right. Will you marry me?
Fanny looked at him, his gray eyes steady and full of quiet hope, and nodded.
Yes.
He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her, the fire crackling beside them, the cabin warm and solid around them. They married the following Sunday in the same church where they had signed the deed, the preacher smiling as he pronounced them husband and wife. Fanny wore the blue dress again, and Joseph wore the same clean shirt. And when they walked out into the sunlight, the town cheered again, louder this time. They spent their wedding night in the homestead, the lamps low, the wind gentle outside. Joseph held Fanny close, and she traced the scars on his hands, the marks of a life lived hard.
Do you ever regret staying?
Not once.
Even when it is hard?
Especially then, because I am not doing it alone anymore.
She kissed him, and they lay together, the night quiet and full of promise. Winter came early that year, the snow falling heavy and steady, and Joseph and Fanny worked together to keep the livestock fed and the cabin warm. They talked about expanding the house in the spring, maybe adding a room for children if they were lucky. Joseph built furniture, and Fanny sewed quilts, their evenings spent in comfortable silence or easy conversation. The town pulled together through the cold months, neighbors helping neighbors, and Joseph found himself part of something he had not expected to want. One night, a blizzard hit hard, and Joseph went out to check the animals, Fanny insisting on coming with him. They made it to the barn and back, holding on to each other through the whiteout. And when they stumbled inside, they were laughing, breathless and freezing.
That was foolish.
Completely.
They stripped off their wet coats and huddled by the fire, Joseph wrapping a blanket around both of them. Fanny leaned into him.
I am glad I stayed.
So am I.
The winter passed and spring arrived with the promised thaw, the rivers rising and the valley flooding in places. But Joseph and Fanny had prepared. They dug drainage channels and built berms, and when the water came, it flowed around their property instead of through it. Other families were not as lucky, and Joseph organized work crews to help rebuild, Fanny coordinating supplies and meals. The community grew stronger through the crisis, the shared struggle binding them. By summer, the valley was green and lush, the crops coming in strong, and Joseph and Fanny celebrated their first harvest together. They sold enough to buy materials for the new room, and Joseph started building, Fanny helping with the framing. One evening, as they worked, the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, the sky clear and vast, and Joseph paused to watch it.
This is what I fought for, even if I did not know it at the time.
What do you mean?
A place to belong, a reason to wake up, someone to share it with.
Fanny set down her hammer and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist.
You have all of that now.
Because of you.
Because of us.
He kissed the top of her head, and they stood together watching the light fade, the first stars appearing. That fall, a famous gunfighter passed through town, just as the rumors had said he would, and Joseph faced him down when the man tried to start trouble at the saloon. The gunfighter was tall and cold-eyed, his reputation known across the territory, and he made it clear he was looking for someone to challenge. Joseph stepped forward.
Take your business elsewhere.
The gunfighter sized him up and smirked. The stranger said he had heard Joseph was a Confederate officer and asked if he still had the spine to fight. Joseph kept his voice level.
I have a wife and a home. I am not interested in proving anything to you.
The gunfighter laughed and reached for his gun, but Joseph was faster, his hand clamping down on the man's wrist before the weapon cleared the holster.
I said take it elsewhere.
The saloon went silent, everyone watching. The gunfighter tried to pull free, but Joseph held firm, his grip like iron.
You can walk out, or I can drag you out. Choose.
The gunfighter met Joseph's eyes and saw something that made him reconsider. He pulled his hand back slowly and nodded. The stranger muttered that he was leaving and walked out without looking back. The saloon erupted in cheers, and Joseph shook his head, embarrassed. Fanny was waiting outside, and she hugged him hard.
You could have been killed.
He was not worth it.
But you stood up anyway.
Because I have something worth protecting now.
They walked home together, Fanny's hand in his, and that night they lay in bed talking about everything and nothing. The ease between them, something neither took for granted. The seasons turned, and their life settled into a rhythm. Hard work and shared joy. Setbacks and small victories. Fanny became pregnant the following spring, and Joseph built a cradle from oak, carving their initials into the headboard. They prepared the new room for the baby, painting the walls and sewing blankets. And when the child came in early winter, it was a girl with blonde hair and gray eyes, a perfect blend of both parents. Joseph held her for the first time with shaking hands, his face full of wonder, and Fanny watched him with tears in her eyes.
What should we name her?
What about Hope?
Fanny smiled.
Hope Daniels. I like that.
They raised Hope together, teaching her to ride and shoot, to read and sew, to love the land and the people who worked it. The town grew around them, new families arriving, the church expanding, the school adding a second room. Joseph served as deputy for a time, and Fanny helped organize community events, their names known and respected. They built a life that was hard but good, full of love and purpose. And on their 10th anniversary, they stood in the same church doorway where they had signed the deed and renewed their vows, Hope standing between them holding their hands. The preacher spoke about resilience and second chances, about the power of choosing hope over fear, and Joseph and Fanny listened with full hearts. When the service ended, they walked out into the sunlight, and the town celebrated with them, the fiddle playing and the children dancing. Joseph pulled Fanny close and kissed her as the music swirled around them.
Thank you.
For what?
For not giving up. For staying. For believing we could build this.
Thank you for being someone worth believing in.
They danced together, Hope joining in, the three of them laughing and spinning under the open sky. The storm that had brought them together was long past, but the promise it forged remained. solid, and true. That evening, they sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sun set over the valley, Hope asleep in Fanny's arms. Joseph put his arm around Fanny, and she leaned into him, the weight of their daughter warm between them.
Do you ever think about leaving anymore?
No, this is home now. You are home.
Same.
They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, the night air cool and clean. Years passed, and their family grew. 2 more children joining Hope. The homestead expanding to include more land and livestock. Joseph taught his sons to work the land, and Fanny taught her daughters to be strong, and together they built something that would outlast them. The town thrived and the territory became a state, the rough edges smoothing as civilization took hold. Joseph and Fanny grew older together, their hair graying, their hands weathered, but the love between them never dimmed. They sat on the same porch every evening, watching the sunset, holding hands, remembering the storm that had brought them together, and the promise that had kept them. One evening, when they were well into their 60s, Joseph turned to Fanny.
If you could go back, would you change anything?
Not a single thing.
Not even the hard parts?
Especially not those. They made us who we are.
Joseph smiled and kissed her, slow and sweet, the years falling away.
I love you.
I love you too.
They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turning purple and gold, the land they had fought for and built stretching out before them. The quilt square still hung above the fireplace, a reminder of the night that had changed everything, and the silver ring Fanny wore had never left her finger. Their children came to visit often, bringing grandchildren who ran through the fields and played in the barn, and Joseph and Fanny watched them with pride. One Sunday they stood in the church doorway again, this time for their granddaughter's wedding, and Joseph leaned close to Fanny.
Look at what we made.
Look at what we survived to make.
They watched the young couple walk out into the sunlight, and the town cheered, the fiddle playing, the cycle continuing. Joseph and Fanny held hands and smiled, their story written in the lives around them, their promise kept. That evening they returned to their porch and sat together as they had for decades, the sunset familiar and beautiful. Fanny rested her head on Joseph's shoulder.
We did good.
We did better than good. We did everything we promised.
Joseph kissed her forehead, and they sat in the growing darkness, the stars emerging one by one, the land quiet and peaceful. The storm that had tested them was a memory now, but the strength it had forged remained, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of choosing hope and love over fear and isolation. The homestead stood solid and strong, the fields green, the family thriving, and Joseph and Fanny held each other as the night settled around them, their hearts full, their promise complete. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and the house creaked gently, the sounds of a life well lived. Joseph tightened his arm around Fanny, and she smiled, her eyes closing.
Thank you for that night in the storm.
Thank you for being brave enough to find me.
They sat together under the stars, the promise they had made binding them still, the love they had built stronger than any storm. The night deepened, and they eventually went inside, closing the door on another day, the fire burning low, the home warm and safe. In the morning they would wake together and work together and love together, as they had for all these years, the promise renewed with every sunrise. The land stretched out around them, hard and beautiful, and they had claimed it not through force but through resilience, through choosing each other when the world had tried to break them. The quilt square hung on the wall, the note stitched into its hem a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of courage can change everything. Joseph and Fanny had lived that truth, built their life on it, and passed it down to their children and their children's children. The storm had come and gone, the threat defeated, the promise kept, and in the end, they had everything they had fought for. A home, a family, a love that had weathered every trial. The sun rose over Sunrise Gulch, Dakota Territory, lighting the valley in gold, and the house stood strong, a testament to the promise that had begun in a storm and endured through every season, unbroken and true. The years rolled on, and the children grew into adults, each carving their own path while staying rooted to the land their parents had fought to keep. Hope married a rancher from the neighboring county and moved just beyond the ridge, close enough to visit every Sunday. The boys took over sections of the homestead, expanding the cattle operation and building their own cabins on the property. The youngest daughter stayed closest, helping Fanny with the garden and the house, learning the old stories and the hard lessons. Joseph's hair turned silver, but his hands stayed strong, and he worked the land until his body told him to slow down. Fanny's eyes remained sharp, her voice steady, and she ran the household with the same determination that had carried her through the early years. They celebrated birthdays and holidays with the whole family gathered, the house bursting with noise and laughter. And Joseph would stand at the head of the table and thank God for every face he saw. One winter a sickness swept through the territory, and several families lost members, but the Daniels homestead weathered it. Fanny nursing anyone who fell ill with remedies she had learned from the town doctor and her own experience. Joseph sat with the sick through the nights, reading to them, praying with them, refusing to let fear take root. When spring came and the sickness passed, the town held a service of thanksgiving, and Joseph and Fanny stood together in the church, their children and grandchildren beside them. The preacher called them pillars of the community, and Joseph shook his head, embarrassed. But Fanny squeezed his hand.
Let them see what we built. It gives them hope.
I just wanted to survive.
You did more than survive. You thrived. We thrived.
Joseph looked at her and smiled, the same smile that had warmed her heart decades before.
Because of you.
Because of us.
They walked home through the muddy streets, the sun breaking through the clouds, and the town felt different, stronger, more permanent. The rough edges had worn away, and what remained was solid, a place where people could build lives and raise families without fear. Joseph and Fanny had been part of that transformation, their story woven into the fabric of the community. That evening they sat on the porch and watched the grandchildren play in the yard, their laughter ringing out.
Do you remember the night we met?
Every detail.
I thought I was going to die in that storm.
I thought I was going to lose everything.
And instead, we found each other.
Fanny leaned into him.
Best storm of my life.
Joseph laughed and kissed her temple. The years continued their march, and the homestead became a landmark, a place people pointed to when they talked about perseverance and success. Joseph's reputation as a fair man and a hard worker spread beyond the county, and he was asked to serve on councils and boards, but he always declined, preferring to stay close to home and family. Fanny organized the women's group at church and helped new settlers get established, sharing supplies and advice, never forgetting what it felt like to be alone and desperate. One afternoon, a young couple arrived in town, their wagon broken, their supplies low, and Fanny brought them to the homestead without hesitation.
You can stay in the barn until you get on your feet.
The couple was grateful, their faces worn with travel and worry, and Joseph helped the man repair the wagon and find work. Over the next months, the couple rebuilt their lives, eventually buying a small plot and starting their own homestead. And they never forgot the kindness shown to them. Years later, when Joseph and Fanny needed help after a bad fall, that same couple was the first to arrive, repaying the debt. Joseph recovered slowly, his body not as quick to heal as it once was. But Fanny nursed him with the same fierce determination she brought to everything.
You are not giving up on me now.
I am not giving up.
Good, because I am not done with you yet.
Joseph smiled and took her hand.
I would not dream of leaving you.
He healed and returned to work, slower but steady, and the homestead continued to thrive. The town grew into a small city, the railroad expanding, new businesses opening, and the old stories of the wild days became legends told to children. Joseph and Fanny became elders, respected and loved, their home a gathering place for family and friends. One summer evening, the whole family came together for a reunion. The yard filled with tables and food, the children running everywhere. Joseph stood on the porch and looked out at the crowd, his heart full.
Look at all of this.
Fanny stood beside him.
This is what we promised each other that night in the storm.
I did not know it would be this big.
Neither did I, but I am glad it is.
Joseph put his arm around her, and they watched the sun set over the gathered family, the sky turning pink and orange.
I love you more now than I did then.
I love you more every day.
They stood together as the light faded and the lanterns were lit, the music starting, the dancing beginning. Joseph led Fanny down into the yard, and they danced together, their movements slow but sure, and the family gathered around to watch. The grandchildren clapped, and the younger ones tried to copy their steps, and Joseph laughed, spinning Fanny gently.
We made it.
We did.
The night wore on, and the stars came out, bright and endless, and Joseph and Fanny sat together on a bench, holding hands, watching their family celebrate. The quilt square hung inside the house, still above the fireplace, and the note stitched into its hem had faded, but the words remained. A promise made in desperation had become a life built in love, and the storm that had brought them together was now just a story. But the strength it had forged lived on. Joseph turned to Fanny.
If I had known that night what was waiting for me, I would have ridden out into that storm 100 times.
And I would have opened that door every time.
They kissed, long and slow, the years falling away, and the family cheered. The reunion went late into the night, and when everyone finally left, Joseph and Fanny returned to their porch, exhausted but happy. The house was quiet again, the yard empty, the stars still shining.
That was perfect.
It was.
They sat in silence, the night cool and peaceful, and Fanny rested her head on Joseph's shoulder.
I am tired.
Me too.
But it is a good tired.
The best kind.
They eventually went inside and prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routines with practiced ease. Joseph banked the fire, and Fanny checked the doors, and they climbed into bed together, the mattress worn and comfortable. Joseph pulled Fanny close, and she sighed, her body relaxing against his.
Good night.
Good night. I love you.
I love you too.
They fell asleep in each other's arms, the house settling around them, the land quiet outside. The next morning they woke together as they had for decades, the sunrise lighting the room, and they rose to face another day, together as always. The homestead stood strong, the family thriving, the promise kept. And Joseph and Fanny Daniels lived the rest of their days in the home they had built, surrounded by the love they had fought for. The storm long passed, but its legacy enduring in every life they touched. The seasons turned, and the homestead became a place of pilgrimage for those who knew the story. People stopping by to ask Joseph and Fanny how they had survived the hard years, how they had built something lasting when so many others had failed. Joseph always gave the same answer.
We chose each other when it would have been easier to give up.
Fanny would add her own wisdom.
And we kept choosing each other every day after.
The visitors would nod and thank them and leave with something to think about, and Joseph and Fanny would return to their routines, the daily work of maintaining a life. One autumn, a journalist came from back east, wanting to write a story about the old settlers, and he sat with Joseph and Fanny on the porch for an entire afternoon, asking questions and taking notes.
We were not special. We were just stubborn.
And lucky.
Very lucky.
The journalist pressed them about the train heist and Eustace Ramsey, about the blizzard and the confrontation, and Joseph's face grew serious.
That was the worst night of my life, and the best. I thought I had lost everything, and instead, I found everything.
The journalist asked Fanny what she remembered most.
The moment I realized he was not going to let me face it alone. That changed everything for me.
The article was published months later, and copies found their way back to Sunrise Gulch, and the town was proud to see their story told, though Joseph grumbled about the embellishments.
He made it sound like I was some kind of hero.
You were.
I was just a man trying to survive.
You were a man who rode out into a blizzard to save people. That is a hero.
Joseph shook his head, but Fanny saw the small smile on his face, and she kissed his cheek. The grandchildren loved the article and demanded to hear the real story over and over, and Joseph would sit them down and tell it plainly. No exaggeration, just the facts. The children listened with wide eyes, especially when he described the moment he thought the train would tip, the weight of the decision to stay or flee.
Your grandmother saved my life that night by giving me a reason to come back.
The children would look at Fanny, and she would smile, her eyes soft.
And he saved mine by being brave enough to ride out in the first place.
The years wore on, and Joseph's health began to decline, his body finally showing the toll of decades of hard labor and old injuries. He moved slower, his hands stiff in the mornings, and he spent more time resting on the porch than working the fields. Fanny stayed by his side, watching him with the same fierce protectiveness she had always had. And she made sure he did not push himself too hard.
You have earned your rest.
I do not like sitting still.
Then sit still with me, and it will not be so bad.
Joseph smiled and took her hand, and they spent long afternoons together, talking about the past and watching the world go by. One morning, Joseph woke with a pain in his chest, and Fanny sent for the doctor immediately, her heart pounding. The doctor came and examined him and told them what they already feared. The doctor spoke gently, his face grave. Joseph's heart was failing, worn out after a lifetime of hard work and old wounds. There was nothing to be done but keep him comfortable and let him rest. Fanny listened with her jaw tight and her hands folded, and when the doctor left, she sat beside Joseph and took his hand.
You are not leaving me yet.
I am not planning on it.
Good, because I have plans for us still.
Joseph smiled weakly and squeezed her hand.
Tell me.
We are going to sit on this porch every day and watch the sunset. And you are going to tell me stories. And I am going to remind you why you fought so hard to stay.
I remember why.
Then, remember harder.
Joseph laughed softly and closed his eyes, and Fanny stayed beside him, refusing to let fear take hold. The family came to visit, each one spending time with Joseph, talking and laughing and reminding him of all the good years. He grew weaker, but his spirit remained strong, and he joked with the grandchildren and told them to take care of their grandmother when he was gone.
She is tougher than all of you combined.
The children promised and hugged him carefully, and Fanny shooed them away when she saw Joseph tiring.
That is enough for today. Let him rest.
The family left, and Fanny sat with Joseph as the sun set, the sky turning deep orange and purple. Joseph looked at her, his eyes clear despite the pain.
I am not afraid.
I know.
Because I had you. I had everything.
You still have me.
Always.
Fanny leaned down and kissed him, her tears falling silently.
I love you more than anything in this world.
I love you. More than life.
They stayed together through the night, Fanny holding his hand, and in the early hours of the morning Joseph took his last breath, his face peaceful, his hand still in hers. Fanny sat with him for a long time, memorizing his face, whispering her goodbyes, and when the sun rose, she finally stood and called for the family. The funeral was held at the church, the building packed with people who had known Joseph and loved him. And Fanny stood at the front with her children beside her, her face composed. The preacher spoke about Joseph's life, his courage, his kindness, his devotion to his family, and Fanny listened with her head high. When it was over and Joseph was laid to rest in the cemetery on the hill, Fanny stood beside the grave and spoke quietly.
You kept your promise every day, and I will keep mine.
She placed a single wildflower on the coffin and turned away, walking back to the waiting family. The days after were hard, the house too quiet, the bed too empty. But Fanny kept moving, kept working, kept living. The children worried about her, but she reassured them.
I am not done yet. I have too much to do.
She threw herself into the work of the homestead and the church, helping others, organizing events, refusing to let grief consume her. At night, she would sit on the porch and talk to Joseph as if he were still beside her, telling him about the day, about the grandchildren, about the small victories and frustrations.
You would be proud of them. They are strong, just like you wanted.
The months passed, and the pain dulled but never disappeared, and Fanny learned to carry it with grace. One Sunday, she stood in the church doorway after the service, greeting people as they left, and the preacher stopped beside her. The preacher spoke gently, his voice warm. He told her that Joseph's legacy was all around them, and the lives he had touched, and the family he had raised. Fanny nodded, her eyes distant.
He gave me everything, and I gave him everything. And that is enough.
She walked home through the town, past the buildings that had grown up around the original structures, past the families who now called Sunrise Gulch home, and she felt the weight of history pressing down. The homestead was waiting for her, solid and unchanged, and she climbed the steps to the porch and sat in her chair. Joseph's chair empty beside her.
I miss you every second.
She closed her eyes and let the sun warm her face. And for a moment, she felt him beside her, his presence steady and comforting. The wind rustled the trees and the house creaked gently, and Fanny opened her eyes and smiled.
I will see you again, but not yet. I still have work to do.
She stood and went inside, the door closing softly behind her, and the homestead stood strong against the sky, a monument to the promise kept, the love endured, and the life well lived. Fanny lived another decade, her body growing frail, but her mind sharp as ever. She remained active in the church and the community, always ready with advice or help, and the younger families looked to her as a source of wisdom. She taught the children about the old days, about resilience and sacrifice, and she made sure they understood that the comforts they enjoyed had been earned through sweat and blood.
Do not take any of this for granted. Your grandparents fought for every inch of it.
The children listened and nodded, and some understood more than others, but all of them remembered her words. Fanny kept the homestead running with the help of her sons and daughters, refusing to move into town even when they offered.
This is my home. I will die here just like he did.
They stopped arguing and made sure she was cared for, visiting often and bringing supplies. Fanny appreciated their concern, but she valued her independence, and she spent her evenings alone on the porch, rocking slowly and watching the stars. One night she felt a sudden exhaustion settle over her, deeper than any she had known before, and she went inside and lay down on the bed she had shared with Joseph for so many years. The quilt was old and worn, but still warm, and she pulled it up to her chin and closed her eyes.
I am ready now.
She thought of Joseph, of the night they met in the storm, of the years they had built together, and she felt a deep peace. Her breathing slowed, and her heartbeat quieted. And in the early morning hours, Fanny Daniels passed away in her sleep, her face calm and content. The family found her the next day, and though they grieved, they also felt a strange comfort, knowing she was finally reunited with the man she had loved for so long. The funeral was held at the church, and the turnout was even larger than Joseph's had been, the building overflowing with people whose lives Fanny had touched. The preacher spoke about her strength and her generosity, about the way she had held the family together after Joseph's death, and the congregation nodded and wept. Fanny was buried beside Joseph on the hill, their graves side by side, and the family placed wildflowers on both. The homestead was passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story, and the quilt square with a stitched note was preserved and hung in the family home as a reminder of where it all began. Decades later, when the great-grandchildren asked about the note, the elders would sit them down and tell the story of Joseph and Fanny, of the blizzard and the train heist, of the promise made in desperation and kept through a lifetime. The family elder, an old woman with Fanny's eyes, spoke slowly, her voice carrying the weight of memory. She told them that love was not just a feeling, but a choice made every day, a commitment to stand together even when the world tried to tear you apart. The children listened, and some of them cried, and they all understood that they carried the legacy of that promise in their blood. The homestead eventually became a historical site, preserved by the family and the town, and visitors came from all over to see the place where Joseph and Fanny Daniels had built their life. The graves on the hill were tended carefully, always covered in fresh flowers, and the story was told and retold until it became legend. But for those who knew the truth, who had heard it from the lips of those who lived it, the story remained real and immediate, a testament to the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. The land endured, the family thrived, and the promise stitched into a quilt square lived on, binding generation to generation. A thread of hope and courage that would never be broken. Years turned into decades, and the homestead became part of the town's identity, a symbol of what could be built when people refused to give up. The descendants of Joseph and Fanny spread across the territory, some staying close to Sunrise Gulch, and others moving to distant cities. But all of them carried the story with them. They told their children about the blizzard and the train heist, about the courage it took to stand against corruption, and about the love that had sustained two people through impossible odds. The story was adapted and embellished over time, but the core remained the same. A reminder that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose to fight for what mattered. The town itself grew and changed. The wooden buildings eventually replaced by brick and stone, the dirt roads paved, the frontier wildness tamed into something resembling civilization. But the church remained, carefully preserved, and the cemetery on the hill was maintained with reverence. Visitors would walk among the graves and stop at the two headstones side by side, reading the names and dates and imagining the lives lived. Some left flowers, others simply stood in silence, and all of them felt the weight of history pressing down. The homestead was open to the public once a year, on the anniversary of the night Joseph rode out into the blizzard, and families would tour the house and see the quilt with the stitched note displayed under glass. Children would ask questions, and parents would answer as best they could, and everyone left with a sense of having touched something sacred. The story of Joseph and Fanny Daniels became required learning in the local schools, taught alongside other tales of frontier resilience, and students would write essays about what the couple represented. Teachers emphasized the themes of sacrifice and commitment, of standing together against injustice, and the lessons resonated with each new generation. The legacy lived on not just in memory but in action, as people in Sunrise Gulch continued to support one another through hardship, to stand up against corruption, and to value the bonds of family and community above personal gain. The spirit of Joseph and Fanny infused the town, an invisible but undeniable presence that shaped decisions and inspired courage. And so the promise made in a moment of desperation, stitched into a quilt square and sealed with a lifetime of devotion, became immortal, a beacon of hope for all who heard the story and understood that love, real love, was the most powerful force in the world. The town's prosperity continued and new families arrived, drawn by the stories and the promise of opportunity. They built homes and businesses, and the community expanded beyond what Joseph and Fanny could have imagined. But even as progress marched forward, the old-timers made sure the history was never forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of the blizzard ride, a memorial service was held at the church, and the current generation would stand in the doorway where Joseph and Fanny had signed the deed, now marked with a brass plaque telling their story. The youngest descendants would read aloud from letters and journals preserved by the family, giving voice to the thoughts and feelings of ancestors long gone. And the congregation would listen in reverent silence. The quilt square remained the centerpiece of the Homestead Museum, protected behind glass but still visible, the stitched words clear despite the passage of time. Tourists would lean close to read the message, and many would tear up, moved by the simplicity and depth of the promise. Guides would explain the context, how a desperate woman had offered everything she could to save the town, and how a broken man had found redemption in accepting that burden and transforming it into something beautiful. The story resonated across cultures and generations because it spoke to universal truths about sacrifice, hope, and the transformative power of choosing love over fear. Scholars came to study the events, writing papers and books analyzing the social dynamics of frontier life and the role of individual courage in shaping community outcomes. But for the people of Sunrise Gulch, the story was never academic. It was personal, woven into their identity. A reminder that they came from people who had faced impossible odds and won through sheer determination. The homestead stood strong through all of it, weathered but unbroken. A physical testament to the lives lived within its walls. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew through the valley and the sun set behind the hills, some claimed they could feel the presence of Joseph and Fanny still, watching over the land they had fought so hard to protect. Their promise eternal, their love undiminished by time or death.